Guys, welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are back to work on the world's rustiest 911, or at least the rustiest 911 I've ever worked on. So sorry for the lighting here. I'm outside. The sun's directly overhead. It's not exactly camera worthy. However, next to me is a 1967 Porsche 911. If you can imagine a car that's basically rusted from like 1 foot above the rockers, that's this car. And I've already replaced all of this on the left-hand side, or the driver's side. I did the seat pan in the last episode, and what I want to work on today is this. This is like the main front suspension pan. It looks like this. There's nothing in there that is usable on this particular car. What I want to do at the very least is get the car prepped to install this. And the first thing I've got to do in that regard is start measuring, because I don't have this thing on a Celette bench, but Porsche is pretty millimeter precise with how they do things. The good news is I have a suspension that I can bolt on the car to get the precise locations of these parts. So what I'm going to do is first take a lot of measurements and write it all down. And then I'm just going to cut away as much of the rusty, bad metal as I can, preserve as much of the factory sheet metal as I can, and then just see if I can get this thing loosely fitted where it needs to be. All right, we've got some measurement progress. You guys might have noticed that I not only wrote a number down, but I sprayed a bit after it. I've got a little kind of red here and a little bit of gray with some measurements. And because I forget things, here is my gray to gray measurement. And then here is my red to red measurement. So that's just in case I forget something and didn't know what I initially measured. I thought it would be a little easier for me to remember. So for those of you who have not done something like this before, first and foremost, being able to rotate it like this is pretty critical. It's really hard to do all of this stuff when it's on your back or even on a lift. So it's very helpful to build one of these, which only costs you a couple $100. But the other part is, if you haven't done like major rust repair like this, I want you to just see what we're looking at here. Like this is really bad. And even all the welds, it looked like it's been replaced before, but really poorly. And I mean, obviously this is just completely and utterly rotted, but all of this stuff gets replaced with like this one piece. So I want you to just kind of take notice. I'm gonna cut through this, and then I'm just gonna cut around the edge here so that I can grind on this side. In fact, this is gonna be replaced as well here. So I really only need to grind to like here on this side, and then I need to grind this lip on the other side. Once I get the new piece placed in there, you go, okay, well maybe that's not quite as bad as I thought. And it really is something that sort of has to go together like a jigsaw puzzle, but you know, just take your time, one panel at a time, and if you get it right and you can bolt the suspension on and everything fits the way it's supposed to, then you've done it well. right, so first fit up. And if you are doing this, know that if this is the first time you've clamped this piece on, you have hours to go in terms of fitment. It really does take quite a long time to get these things fitted correctly. It's got to be square and this way and that way. And of course, because it's the front end, it's super complicated, you know? There's a lot to do here, but I do want to show you guys kind of what it looks like. You know, it's a much better, obviously, fully brand new setup, which is great. But it also identifies a few things like, oh, I'm probably going to need to replace this piece and this piece here. Obviously, it looks so much better, though, being all brand new metal. And I'm using this hole, which is all the fender holes, to locate this panel, which helps locate this panel, which helps locate that panel. Now I will take some measurements again and see how close I am to my original marks. All right, so I'm about 5 millimeters that way. So this whole piece needs to go that way. I've made a mark about where I need it to be. And then I've just basically identified a couple of spots that are preventing it from being there. So disassemble everything, grind all that stuff off, reassemble everything. Okay, back at it after a lunch break. Now, thankfully, I have this car in the garage and easy access to the suspension pan. So I'm able to take some exact measurements. And it looks like I'm about 3 millimeters off. So this whole thing needs to go 3 millimeters this way. I'm going to pull this screw. I'm actually going to take my calipers and set it to 3 millimeters and just put a little scribe here. So I have a reference point of how far in to move this thing. And that should get me right in the ballpark here. I'm now happy with my distance between here and here. Just starting to try to put the puzzle together of this. I'm not entirely happy with how it's fitting yet, but I'm gonna call it a day. I've been at this for about 7 hours today, and all I will say is that it's getting there. This thing still has to be fit. That's gonna be a whole thing. You know, it has to beautifully interface here, and I'm gonna need to order one on the other side. But this bottom piece is getting very close. One thing I haven't done yet is taken measurements here, which I can do on the other cars that I have here. Once it's good to go, I'll just take the cutting wheel and weld along there. And then this will get spot welded with a spot welder that I do not own yet, but will in the near future. Be right back. All right, dudes, it's a few days later, and I've made some major progress on Rustmageddon here. A couple things. Number one, I've decided to bolt a front suspension on just to see how this location was, and it was pretty much millimeter precise. So my plan today is to get this thing together and hopefully tack it here, and I don't even know what else. Maybe try to get a couple other pieces in place. You'll also notice I have done a massive cleanup job. This was very rusty So I used some rust converter, otherwise known as muriatic acid. And I did that on the entire underside here where I've been working. And it's just transformational. So a little muriatic acid, cleaned it up, then neutralized it, and then sprayed it with this Steel It paint, which is kind of like Pour 15. It's the same stuff I used on the top here. And it's a really good coating because you can weld through it. And it's also super protective. It won't rust. And yeah, it's really good in that respect. So right now I'm going to bolt the front suspension back on. I've already cleaned up the threads here. I bought a couple of new bolts. And I'm going to use that to locate this piece. And if all is well, we should be tacking this thing on today. So one thing I have for exactly this reason is this diagram of all the measurements of the 911 chassis, including this one right here, which is the one we need. It says 497 millimeters, 0.3 plus or minus. And that is basically center to center of the suspension mounting points. So that's what you've just seen me measure to make sure that I'm that exact dimension, which I am on top. So I'm actually going to put a new screw in there and then start working on the bottom and make sure that is spot on as well. So we are spot on. I've got this bolt tight, this bolt tight, this bolt tight. Everything's tight. I am spot on, plus minus 1 millimeter. And I feel pretty good about it. So the next thing I'm going to do is try to loosely assemble the front end here with the front latch panel just to make sure everything aligns the way it's supposed to. Once that's good, I should be able to cut this and weld it so that I can then take the suspension off and just tack it together right here. All right, guys, so more fiddling. And I've got now tech screws everywhere, and this thing is really fitting together nicely. Look how lovely and flush this is. Again, my dimensions are still spot on. I've got clamps everywhere. I think I'm in a position now where I can remove the front suspension, which has been the plan all day here. Remove it, do a little cut and butt right here, and just tack this with probably 3 or 4 tacks per side, and then that front piece is in the right spot and ready to be built upon with all of the rest of this stuff. I've got tech screws locating everything. Everything really seems like it's fitting really well together. And yeah, man, I'm pretty stoked. right up on it.
Where's it go? It's good. That's it. Wait. A little closer, That's all.
It's Raphael's car, so we're putting him to work on this part before we put a little steelet on here. Very satisfying. This is what it looks like all tacked together. I'm only doing this because everything's outside. Be nice not to have it all rust. All right, we've got a nice coating of steelet on here now, as it is outside. I mean, it just looks glorious. The lighting is so bad for this video, so it's really hard to tell, but let's just assume it looks really good. How's that sound? All right, so that was a job well done. Super satisfying to get that front end on there. It's looking amazing. Super satisfying to get a lot of the rust off of the underside and clean that up. Obviously, the seat pan is awesome as well. As far as what's next, I'm gonna continue to work on the front end. I'm like gazillion checking every measurement, but one thing I wanna do is get it back to being flat and throw a hood on there and make sure everything is fully aligned before I start tacking up any of the other front panels. We also need a couple of interior panels that kind of surround the gas tank. And I wanna make sure that those things are where they are supposed to be before everything gets stitched up and welded, etc., etc. As always, thank you guys for watching. You guys rock. High five in the comments. We'll talk to you next time.